Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am joined by Sara Ness. She is the chief catalyst at authrev.org. That's AUTHREV.org. She is the founder and CEO of Authentic Revolution. In 2012, at 20 years old, Sara founded still ongoing learning communities in Austin and Houston that became two of the biggest AR groups, authentic relating groups, in the world. She has gone on to work with tens of thousands of students in sectors from Google to Mind Valley to Burning Man. Sara's publications, including the Authentic Relating Games Manual, the core text of the Authentic Relating Field, have helped seed 100 plus communities in every continent except Antarctica. That's pretty ambitious. Sara is passionate about exposing the joy of human connection and exploring our creative potential through group process. She lives in a community in Bastrop, Texas. Sara, thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time and welcome.
Thank you. It's good to
Yeah.
see you again.
Yeah, likewise. So basically, this came out of a little. Our meeting came out of a little bit of I guess, a curiosity that I had when I was talking to John a while back about the female experience, which I'm sure we'll get into it more later. Um, I imagine. Who knows? Who knows?
I will be here to represent all of humanity.
Perfect. Yeah, we can just blanket everybody.
Easy
One
peasy.
person, no
Exactly.
problem.
Yep.
And but we prepared some questions for you that we just wanted to, I guess, start by asking you, like, what's your deal? And which is to say, like, what can you tell us a little bit about why you created the whole authentic relating communities? What is your fascination with community in general? Because I know when I first met you, like way back in Houston years ago, you were doing work on discovering community building. Or could you explain a little bit more about your work and why you do it and why you're passionate about it?
I can try. Yeah. Um, I got interested in authentic relating through living in co-ops and intentional housing communities during college and noticing it was like a really weird situation. You take a whole bunch of 20, like 19 and 20 something year olds that have like never had to live outside their parents' home together, and you put them in a house together and you go, okay, manage yourselves. And it's just like, it just doesn't go so well. Like in some ways it's a really phenomenal experience, because it's like the first time that we had to be responsible for ourselves in that way, had to make financial decisions, had to keep a house clean. Um, but in other ways, there was a lot of dissolution. Like the co-op that I lived in, the membership turned over a couple times, even during the 3 years that I was there, and there were lots of conflicts. And I got really interested in the ways that people try to live together and try to interact, because one of the biggest issues in the house was communication. People talking behind each other's backs, people forming coalitions, people kind of having what felt like unnecessary conflicts. And I was introduced to authentic relating through a really wonderful set of human beings that had been through a program at the Integral Center, which I will always be grateful for.
Right,
And
that's where it started. Okay, who were those
yeah,
people?
John and Brian. And
Okay.
yeah, they had been through a men's program at the Integral Center, which was kind of like a flagship in Boulder, Colorado. That was the one that was leading, had kind of like founded authentic relating and circling, or popularized it, depending on which account you want to go by.
Yeah.
Um, and these guys had brought back this little manual of authentic relating games. At the time, there weren't training programs in that specific methodology, but um, we picked up on it as a way to help the local ecstatic dance communities in Houston and Austin connect
Right.
more.
Okay. And
So it came
what
out of
can
it.
you describe in a nutshell what authentic relating games is about, or what it is, or why it exists?
Yeah, so I make a
If
distinction
nobody's,
between,
if some people haven't like heard of that at
oh
all.
yeah, for sure. Thank you. I make a distinction between authentic relating and authentic relating games. I want to say first, I don't think that any way we communicate is inauthentic. Like we're
Mm.
always communicating from some truth, some part of ourselves. I think we have multiple different aspects of ourselves. And sometimes when we feel like we're being inauthentic, it's just because another value, another piece of ourselves is speaking. So, but authentic relating is a practice of basically like awareness and agency. So trying to be ever more aware of what is true inside of us, what these different parts are speaking, what are our values, what is most aligned with our values, and then trying to speak and live from that place, which I think Cheng Shen is really in line with as well. Um, and the other piece of that, that's kind of the authenticity. The relating piece is noticing how that lands with someone else. I'm sure we've all had the experience of finding our truth, being honest, and then having someone else get really mad at us for it. The relating piece is being
Oh
able
no,
to
that's
negotiate those.
never happened to
Oh
me.
yeah, I know
I've
you,
never.
Brendan, have not really had that problem, but maybe some
No.
of our listeners could just empathize with this a little bit. Ones who aren't as developed like me.
Right, right.
So the relating piece is really noticing like what is happening in someone else's world when I speak and how do I want to show up to be in relationship not only with myself but also with the world. So that's kind of an awareness practice and like a continuous noticing and calibrating and trying to get ever more aligned with both what is true for me and the impact that I want to have on others and my ability to notice that. Authentic relating games are like training tools for this. So in the same way that if I'm doing martial arts, I might practice the same kick like 50, 100, 1,000 times. If I am trying to learn skills of more self-awareness or communication with others, I may want to do an authentic relating game that practices that skill 50, 100, 200 times, whatever it is. So I might want to
Yeah.
play an empathy game is one of the authentic relating games where I speak for a couple minutes, the other person reflects, I refine what I'm saying, and then they share what they think they understand, like what the deeper cut is, what the value is, what my authenticity is. And so that's training the skill of being able to listen deeper, understand what's beneath someone's words, and also reflect back accurately. Both skills that like you may think you're good at, but like especially under pressure and conflict, those things just go out the window.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I wanted to add to what you're saying that I think one of my favorite parts about I've done a little bit of authentic relating. Not I wouldn't say a lot of that kind of training. I mean, I've trained tons and tons of interacting with people here in a very honest way, which may have some carryover, but that's irrelevant. I wanted to share one of my favorite parts is it seems that one of the things that authentic relating really does for people is it takes people who have like may have no intimacy with one another whatsoever, and in a very short order our people are very intimately connected. And I was like, holy shit, that
Uh-huh.
works fast.
It's an interesting thing because it basically like co-opts a lot of the actions and emotions that make us like that are involved in friendship and building bonds. Like most of the time we interact at like what we think is going to be the most comfortable social script for both people. We're like, okay, when you meet somebody new, if you ask them a question about like their childhood trauma, probably not going to go well. Now, for 10% of people, maybe they're going to like completely open up at that, right? But if you think that 90% of people won't, you're not going to ask that question unless you've spent a lot of time with somebody. And then being able to ask a question like that is a marker of friendship.
Right.
But in authentic relating, we create these little, like, kind of artificial worlds in which you can ask questions like that right off. And so our bodies signal, oh my God, this must be someone I'm really deeply connected with. It's kind of an
Okay.
intimacy. It can actually be a problem sometimes because then people feel like, oh my God, I've made such close friends. This is amazing. I'm going to connect with these people forever. But something about community is that if we form a relationship with a community or with a practice, we're not forming relationship with the individuals in it. So you can leave an event or a group feeling so connected and then be really frustrated that nobody followed up with you. But in
Right.
reality, you haven't formed a relationship with the people there. And relationship takes time. It takes knowing what your differences are with somebody. It takes knowing what your values are. It's more than this transpersonal or practice-based connection. It requires a certain degree of conflict and
What
discipline.
is transpersonal? What
Transpersonal is like is like beyond the individual. So like when you feel love or connection with somebody, it can be to like, oh, you as a human, like I see your, your beauty coming through. I can feel like my connection, but it doesn't necessarily have all the elements of like, and I know your history. I know like what my interactions with you have been like. I know what you show up with
So
other people.
transpersonal
That's
is
what
like sort of you said beyond the individual. So like I
Mhm.
could be like not the person. It's like transpersonal, as in
Kind of think of, so
like our
let's,
common ground that's not individual. It's like as humanity or something like
yeah.
that in that
Yeah,
direction.
like when you do meta meditation, for instance, and you like say that you wish good for all beings, you wish everybody well,
Yeah.
that is a transpersonal meditation. When you connect with a sense of oneness, that's transpersonal. But there's also transpersonal elements even when you're developing deep connection, but you don't actually really know the person that you're connecting with. I would almost consider like you're connecting with the idea of them. You're connecting with almost like the feeling of connection to another human instead of the feeling of connection to this person, given your
Right. It's
context.
like it could be anybody that
Could
we're
be anybody.
connecting, and it just so happens to be you, but any other person sitting in your
Yes.
shoes, we would have the same thing because it's not personal. It's like
Right. But the benefits of this are there's a couple of them. Like even of playing games where like you're going to feel this, I don't want to call it an artificial sense of connection, but you could think of it as like an accelerated sense within a particular area. Number one, it starts you out. It starts an interaction. Like it's really hard to strike up conversations with people without a pretext. Authentic relating games, you can talk with a whole bunch of people because you have a defined form, even
right,
if you're
because
outside of
somebody
it.
defines it ahead of time. It's like here's the parameters in which you're going to operate. Now go
Right.
ahead
Or
and have
even
at
like
it.
I'll
It's
be at parties sometimes and I'll be in a group and people will be talking about something and I'll be like, "Hey guys, do you want to play an authentic relating game? Like let's go around and each person can offer a question for the group to answer and we'll all answer it." So it's like all of a sudden I've just turned what was kind of a disjointed conversation where probably one person was talking a lot more than others into a conversation where there's a much more balanced talking time and everyone gets a chance to speak, which is one of the hallmarks of authentic relating.
Hmm.
The other thing that it can do is like, if you're, say you have a partnership, you're living with somebody, or you're living in a community, or you're around a group of people for a while, like at a Chengshen course,
Yeah.
um, you you kind of build up resentments with people over time. And all
Nah.
your conversations, yeah, right? You guys don't have the problem. I'm gonna have to come to some of these Chengshen courses if it's
I
like
know. We don't
it's
have
obviously
any
you guys have gotten
breakdowns
so
in
evolved.
communication. We're actually just like walking on water all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. If you get annoyed with each other, you just like kick each other and then you're fine. I've been to the dojo, okay? Like, um, uh, anyways, um, let me recapture my train of
Sorry,
thought.
I kind of yeah.
No, you're totally fine. I appreciate the jokes. I'm just like, as John said, still waking up.
But
So,
you don't when you're doing authentic relating games, you're not negotiating who does the dishes. And you're not having to deal with the little nuances of life when people are being unconscious, whether they're living each other or just like getting through traffic. And there's
yes.
a lot of stuff that's not present, even though there's this other stuff that's accelerated and made accessible for people.
Right. You can use the forms to process things like that, and you can also use them. I think what I was going to say is you can use them to build up a buffer of connection that can hold you through those small conflicts. So, like, if you're having a lot of difficulty and you're like constantly getting into arguments with somebody, sometimes it's good to like take a little bit of time aside and say, "Hey, can we just check in? Like, let's play a curiosity game where you get to talk for 5 minutes. I'm just asking you questions." And all of a sudden, we're out of the frame of the like continuous, like niggling fight we've been in. Or I could be in a conflict with you and we're totally not hearing each other. And I say, "Hey, let's try that empathy game that I mentioned earlier so that both of us feel really heard." Oftentimes these days, I don't even play the exact authentic relating games, but the principles have become so woven into my life that it's pretty easy to kind of access that sort of curiosity or like stop myself and look in and go, what am I actually wanting? So it's also skill training for um, these particular forms of being able to pause yourself being able to speak about what's true, hear the other person, know when to go to curiosity. But honestly, a lot of the work I do these days is within like, how do you use this when in conflict? Because people get in a very different brain state and you have to
Yeah.
practice a different way.
Yeah, when the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, there's like more
No,
about
the standard skills are probably out the window. I mean that I've seen that here because I do conflict management here in a different way, maybe more dictatorial, like when it's with apprentices or something like that. But I have certain things in place that it's like, no, you will get along, and here's how you're going to do it.
oh man, I wish I had that power.
Little rough, yeah. It's a different. I mean, in that environment, it's very different, but it's also these people have to live with each other. They've never met each other before, and you got to live with them and get along and be a powerful team and do it under high stress situations for like 8 months.
Right.
And so like have certain things
And
for
there's no group that can be together that long without ending up in some sort of conflict. So
oh
like
yeah,
you're saying, like
always gonna happen. Yeah.
you can do it by having somebody at the top that's basically saying, okay, guys, this is the rules and these are what we do. You can do it by taking time to discuss like what norms you want. And sometimes this is better to do after a conflict occurs. Like, okay, so you have a big conflict with someone and then you sit down with the group afterwards. You basically look like, what happened? What
Mm,
added fuel to this fire? What helped it resolve? What would we want next time? And you start coming up with kind of like norms for yourself of what how would you navigate and manage if these things come up in future. In our Art of Difficult Conversations course, we make a distinction between actions and patterns. So actions
okay.
are things that happen once where you can like kind of talk about it of like, hey, you like didn't pick up your stuff. You know, that's a frustration I have. Patterns are like, you know, you didn't pick up your stuff like every day for the last week and we've discussed it in this way.
Right.
um and like, can we find a different mode of resolving this? And I think with when patterns come up, like you have to take time to negotiate them and try to solve them and resolve them, or they just keep happening.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say are some of the core, it seems to me that behind like say authentic relating or anything or behind anything in the world in a sense there's principles that allow for things to work and be functional, and
Mm.
they like there might be a technique or like here's game a certain game and this game is all about curiosity, and so then the principle might be curiosity, that it could be this game to get you more curious or this game to get you more curious, but then there's like the essence of curiosity, or gravity, like a principle about objects. All objects adhere to gravity.
Hmm.
What would you say are some of the principles that you've discovered over the
Hmm.
years that make what you do powerful or make what
I
you
like that
do
question.
work?
I don't have them listed out. um but I can come up with some off the cuff. I think I
Yeah.
really like that question. I want to think about it more in general.
Because like
um
I know curiosity is definitely, I would say that could be like an operational principle that I see very
it is,
clearly right off the cuff or right off the bat. It's like
right,
wanting
but
to know about somebody
that
else's experience or something. But
I think
just
things
keep
like
going.
that are more like, I guess I see principles most useful when like you know why they should be applied or like what the area is. Like if you say curiosity in general, people are like, "Oh yes, of course I should be curious," but like why why do we do that? Why is it important? So like maybe I think in translation to a principle would be something like people can't hear you until they're heard themselves, like
Okay.
most people. So like
What do you mean?
like so two reasons to do curiosity. One is that one is you can never fully know somebody else's world. We can only have assumptions. And the other is usually somebody has to be heard before they can hear. So in terms of you can never really know someone else's world, like, and I'm going to frame a lot of things in terms of conflict because I'm kind of obsessed with power and conflict these days. I just think it's
Okay.
like where the shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
Uh which is why it's interesting. It's like you can teach people to relate in all sorts of good ways when they're regulated and like each
Yeah.
other. But when they're
Yeah.
fighting, like that's where you know if your tools work.
Yeah. There you go.
Um, so in terms of like people can't hear you until they've been heard, like most people when they're triggered or when they're upset, they they go into a space where their normal relating tools are just like not online, like you're seeing the other person as a threat. It's really hard to adopt a same team mentality unless you have some sort of training,
Right.
which is almost a form of martial arts training. So usually one person has to be willing to take a step back first and go, okay, what is happening for you? What is true? And to do that, first we have to recognize that we're not like open to the other person. We're not curious. When we get triggered, the first thing that goes away is curiosity. So
Yeah.
noticing even ahead of time, I like asking people to map out their conflicts and ask, like, what do you not know about the other person? Like, okay, you have a story about why
That's a
they did this
great
thing.
question right in the middle. Like, all right, you're pissed at them. All right, what are you not knowing about them?
Exactly.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly. It's like counterintuitive, but then you're like, wait a
Oh
second.
yeah,
I
there was a
like
bunch.
don't
Okay, go
actually
ahead.
know if they meant to like go back and pick up their dirty clothes. Like, I don't know if like they were just like they forgot about them or like they left them there because for them like for a big thing with dishes, for instance, some people like have a norm that dishes should be cleaned up right when they're used, and some people are like, I'm going to come back to them tonight. But if you see dirty dishes in the sink all the while and you're always cleaning them up for the other person, you don't know if they meant to come back to them that night. So one question is like, I don't know what your norms are around doing dishes. I don't know
Yeah.
when you tend to do them. I don't know like what your plans are. I don't know how you feel when you see a sink full of dirty dishes. Like, do you even notice it? Does it bug you? My brother's house can be trashed and he doesn't even notice it.
Yeah.
Like,
And one of my gripes is like, did you ask them? Like, did
yeah,
you ask them
exactly.
what their deal is with dishes? Like, wouldn't that be a good thing to know?
Right. But we don't think about it because the first thing we do is we like construct a story. There's like an attribution bias that we have that it has to do with the other person's like um personality instead of
What's
their
an attribution bias? Is that
so attribution, God, there's a
like
it's
attributing
not
cause?
yeah, there's a different word that's supposed to go before it. It's like negative attribution bias or something. But basically that we attribute somebody's actions to their personality instead of to situational factors. So basically we're like, this person is a slob. And we make
Right.
up a whole story about that instead of going, maybe they had something else they had to go to and so they couldn't do their dishes. Or maybe they grew up in a family where it was normative to leave dishes in the sink for a while and then do one big clean.
Right. I can totally see that. Yeah, I think my brain would immediately jump to, no, they're just fucking sloppy.
Right.
And it's like a judgment of an immediate judgment of the cause of the issue being something to do with their character rather than like something that may be happening in their life that would have that occur.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to find what the attribution bias is actually called because it is bugging me. Fundamental attribution error. That's what it is.
Fundamental attribution error,
Yes.
FAE.
Yep.
Okay.
The FAE. It's a really common thing that gets referenced.
Interesting.
So now you know. Yeah, it's basically
Okay.
the most classic example of that is somebody cuts you off in traffic and you go, they're such an asshole. Well, you don't know if they have a pregnant wife in the back seat, right? Like,
Yeah,
so
no. They are definitely an asshole.
right. But
And
if
I'm
you
riding
cut
in the
off
back.
somebody else in traffic, you go, God, I'm so late to work. So
Or
it's
my
really
wife was pregnant in the back seat.
exactly. Yeah, you never know when there's a pregnant wife in the back seat, man.
That's fucking funny.
It's a good metaphor for life, man.
There's a guy, a local guy that I know. He's fucking he has this joke, or not a joke, but it's like, yeah, somebody can be like creeping around a turn really slowly, and you don't know, they might have a wedding cake in the back seat and they just have to go super slow around the curve or something like that. And then I think
There
he
you
was in the
go.
car with a buddy of mine, and somebody was creeping real slow. He rolled the window down. He's like, I hope your cake's okay.
Oh, that makes me really happy. Yeah.
Hope you have a beautiful baby.
Yeah. Hope your marriage is going good. Shit.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Right.
that would be one. And what other principles or dynamics have you discovered that are
Can,
yeah, go ahead, John.
can I ask a question that's I think it's gonna add something to what you're asking.
Sure.
You're talking about principles, and I would like to know a little bit more about where those principles show up in what domains. Because you said, Sarah, that you're interested now more in conflict.
Mhm.
So where, like, sometimes we talk about principles showing up in boxing or in
Yes.
a specific martial art or in some other totally different domain, like, I don't know, plumbing. But you're talking about conflict. Are we talking about like war in Gaza and Ukraine? Are we talking about who does the dishes? What kind of conflicts are we talking about?
Because
Yeah,
it
good
doesn't
question. I
seem to
think
be physical altercation as conflict,
uh
I imagine.
not usually what I confront. Yeah, so that actually helps. Like I'd say the two realms I'm most interested in these days are conflict and community building separately, although they often overlap. Um, so
And what
when
kinds of conflict?
usually interpersonal conflict. So like there's the idea of like war in Gaza and such. In some of the books I'm reading, they call that high conflict, which is like seemingly intractable situations that like are, you know, between different powers, usually between gangs, between countries, whatever. That I've studied negotiation. It's like there are overlaps in principles, but I don't care as much about that because most of us are never going to confront that. Mediation and negotiation are really different skills than what we're doing every day because in mediation, and if you want to change a conflict like that, most of the time you're going in as a mediator, unless you're a member of the kind of whatever organization is in conflict. If you're a member, you have to get access to power, and there's a whole different set of kind of theories and practices that we do teach around like how do you get power, how do you negotiate power. But if you don't have authority within a group, most of the time what you're managing is more like interpersonal or small group conflict where you're able to have leverage on it. Um, we do talk some about how do you work within power dynamics. So like if you want to raise from your boss or you're in conflict with your boss, what do you need to do to gain enough power that you can actually affect the situation? But then you're kind of assuming that you're able to negotiate on somewhat of the same footing. Like you both have a stake in the game. Um, so that's a lot of the conflict we're dealing with, where like both of you care at least somewhat about the outcome, and are willing to talk with each other about it. However, the conflicts that I'm most interested in are the ones where like both people are not acting as reasonable agents, right? Like you have some way to contact the other person. You're not just screaming into a void, but the other person doesn't have the same viewpoints as you. They don't want to like relate with you as authentically as you want to relate with them. You probably think you're relating authentically. You're probably actually really triggered and unreasonable. Um, so I'm interested in these conflicts in our life that happen like with our families when our uncle is talking about politics at the dinner table and we're like, why the fuck are we talking about this every single Christmas? Like, I don't agree with this. How do I change the conversation? Or you're getting into the same fight with your partner that you've gotten into 15 times that they're never willing to actually listen and change their behavior. Like those are the kind of conflicts that I think affect us on a day-to-day basis. So that's mostly what we work with. Um, and I'd say some of the heuristics in that I might name is like everybody has a different inflection point, like what we call concerns. It's like it's the things that they care about. What's at stake for them if this conversation goes badly is a really good question to ask yourself. Even what's at stake for me in this?
Hmm.
If this conversation went badly, if I didn't get my uncle to stop talking about politics, what is bad about that? What happens? What value of mine is threatened? And if you can talk to people in terms of the values that they hold, even doing some research ahead of time on like what is important to you, then it's a completely different conversation. If you think that if you're aware that your uncle is talking about politics because like um maybe because he's really worried that the country is like going in a negative direction and that if he doesn't convince you as a member of your family that he knows has a different perspective, that like a lot of people are going to be harmed. Let's say he really cares about immigration. He's like, I think that you're not going to have a job in 10 years if I don't convince you that voting for Trump on immigration is like the best thing. Well, now you know a little bit more about why he's talking about politics, and you can frame your arguments in terms of that. Like, hey, I also really care about having a good job. And like, I get that you have that concern for me. And if I were in your shoes, I imagine that like I would be scared about people immigrating to this country too if I thought that they were taking our jobs. So like, can I get curious with you about this? And then you can start kind of unraveling a little bit of like, does he have the correct information? Like, are immigrants actually taking our jobs? Like, is that the reason he really cares about this thing? What are his stories about? Like, has he felt job insecurity? And you can go to like, here's how I feel about job insecurity. Here's so like all of a sudden you have a point of connection. So that's one thing is like everybody has a lever, everybody has an inflection point. In negotiate or in mediation, we talk
When
about,
excuse me, when
yeah.
you say an inflection point, what is an inflection point?
So in mediation, we talk about positions versus interests. A
Okay.
position is like, I don't want you to like leave your clothes on the floor. An
That's my
interest under,
position. Don't leave your
yeah, that's
clothes
my
on the
position.
floor. That's my position. Okay.
Right. And the other person's position might be, I want to like have autonomy over my own space. Like you don't get to tell me what to do. Right.
Okay.
Underneath the first person's position might be like, I get really stressed out when the place is dirty.
Right. So that's what I'm actually interested in. Here's my position, and here's like the interests
Right.
that are driving
My
that
interest
position,
is
kind of
like,
thing.
I want to have a clean house.
Yeah.
And underneath that, like my kind of concerns about that are like, I get really stressed when the house isn't clean.
Yeah.
And it's, and then we can talk about like, well, what does clean mean to you? And like
Right. How
how
do you
fast
define
does it need
clean?
to be cleaned, right? So like all of a sudden, instead of just being at the like, I say this, you say this, we're broadening the field enough that there's more points to talk. And if we discover what really matters to each person, like under that, I just don't want to feel stressed out when I walk in my house. Then there's this whole range of things that we could talk about.
Right. It's a
Like maybe it's not
totally
even
different conversation
clothes.
at that point. Right.
Yeah, like maybe I can do other things to help you stop being stressed out that have nothing to do with the clothes. Like so it really changes the conversation, but the thing is like for each person, that inflection point is different. And you have to get curious. You have to actually do some thinking. Sometimes I'll do research on the person ahead of time. If I'm in conflict, I'll go around to their friends and I'll be like, what does this person care about? Like, why are they motivated? I won't like blab to them about the conflict or shit talk the other
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
because
I was just
that's
thining
another
about you
principle.
doing
Coalition
some
building is never
recon.
good. What?
So, no,
Oh
but
yeah, I totally do recon.
yeah. You're like,
Yeah, like don't get lazy with it. Like if you're gonna have a conflict with someone, fucking make it good. I like fighting.
me too.
Yeah, I know.
So
Yeah.
clarity is a principle.
Can you say more about that?
Clarity around what people really value and what their needs are. You said their inflection points, their interests. And if you're
Yeah.
not clear around what yours are and what the other person's are, the chances of having
Hmm.
a good outcome are pretty minuscule because people are going to be arguing from their positions,
Right.
unconscious of their interests. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Curiosity is in service of clarity, and clarity to me is in service of effectiveness. Like it's, I think it's a little bit dumb not to learn the skills to have better conflicts. In the same way, I think it's a little bit dumb not to either know how to defend yourself in a dark alley or have like a 6'2" husband like I do, who you bring most
Or
places.
both.
Yeah. And
Right?
what do you said have good oh no, effective conflict. No, what did you say? Something what kind of conflicts? Good conflicts?
Like effective conflicts, like
I
conflicts
think
that
you said better conflicts. I
better
thought it was
conflicts.
like kind of like a Viking, kind of like you want better conflicts.
Yeah,
Like
my meme these days is like fight better.
What does better mean
Better
in
is
terms of
like
a conflict?
conflicts in which something doesn't necessarily have to change, right? A lot of conflicts on the level of positions are just not reconcilable. We have this false idea that if we just talk to the other person enough, they will see our point of view or the thing will go away. Most of the time, that's not the case. But if we can negotiate at the level of interests, then we end up getting closer and closer to knowing the best way to interact with each other that's going to cause the most creativity, the most joy, the most like ability to orient towards our common goals. So I see better conflicts as ones that get us closer to that sort of understanding and cohesion, or get us closer to understanding where we're not going to interact. Like not everything has to end in connection. I'll give an example. Like I had a conflict I live with a couple other people on a piece of land, and a while ago, I got into a big fight with one of them. And I noticed that there was a pattern of like when we got into fights, she would go to a place of like blame and resentment and like kind of like saying this is just coming from your shadow and you're projecting all over me, which by the way are like
Yeah.
really shitty things to say to somebody because there's no way to come back at them. If someone says you're just coming from shadow, or if you say that to somebody else, everything they then say is going to be painted within that.
Sure. Yeah. Like a carte blanche or
Right. Or you're
blanket.
racist or
Yeah.
something. Like any sort
I
of
get
like
it. Yeah.
right, as long as you put the person in the box, it's just there's nothing they can do to get out of it except for like walk away or gain power and come back, which it's just don't do it. Like like, talk about people's actions, not about their personality.
Yeah.
Um,
Or how do
you
you
know
know? What do you even know my shadow? Did you ask me? Like, are you actually,
right. Like you
how
might
could you
see
even
something
possibly
that's
say that?
you might see something that's accurate, but don't say it in the heat of conflict, man. It's just think about what the intention of your actions are. Like, if there's anything that I can have people take away, it's like keep your brain on. And when you're saying something, think about what outcome you're wanting with it.
Yeah. Like
And
for
yeah,
me, just in this example, coming from the background that I have, it seems like then if somebody were to give a blanket statement like that, their real intent is not to further connection, but in fact to hurt the other person, and they may not be honest about those intentions.
it's self-protection. And so what happened in that one where I was going with it is like, so I would notice that like most people, they'll go into that mode and they'll go into it for like a day or a few days. And that
Hmm.
it happens. Like we get unreasonable in conflict sometimes. Oftentimes the best thing you can do is take some space. While triggers are high, like you want to give yourself space to calm down. Almost always a pause when you're really escalated is the best thing that you can do instead of continuing to process it. But this person would take months to come back down.
Hmm.
And I talked to her about the
That
pattern a
seems a
couple
bit
times.
excessive.
Yeah, it was. In my mind, I talked to her about the pattern a couple times, and eventually I was like, you know what? I think my resolution to this is when she gets angry, I'm just going to cut off communication. And that's an effective resolution. Like if you tell the person that and they're like, cool, like, they might not like it, but you're like, all right, the alternative is that we can workshop this pattern. And like, if you're in it, I can ask someone else that you trust to like tell you that you're in it, or like you can take my word for it and we can pause it or whatever. But if that doesn't work, like I'm going to have an outcome that I'm going to do. So like not everything has to be about coming back to connection. It can be about defining the places in which you are going to connect. Like, all right, we can't be good lovers, but we can definitely be good business partners, things like that.
Right.
But then within the places that you have decided to connect or that you have to connect, like say it's family, can you use the energy that is generated by conflict to move you towards less trigger, less despair, less if you let unhappiness stagnate because you never want to get into a fight, you end up with a worse outcome most of the time.
Yeah.
So I believe that conflict is actually really important as long as we're doing it in a way that's like, okay, and heuristics might be like when you're really, really triggered, have a kind of sign where you take a pause. I have this with a collaborator of mine who were both very fiery people. And after our last fight, we talked about it and we were like, okay, the best thing we can do is if one of us says purple, that's our safe word. That conversation ends for 10 minutes and then we'll come back.
Right.
Um, like think about what the other person's concerns are, ideally ahead of time when you're not triggered, if you can set up for the conversation, or after it's gone badly and you take a step away, think about it, come back to it, get curious if you possibly can, let them have their own experience. Something people do badly a lot during conflict, and one of kind of the most important things in authentic relating is like, yeah, saying like you were just trying to hurt me. That's like a common one. Or even like, I know that your intentions were good. Even that, like, you don't necessarily know their intentions were good, right? So like phrases that aren't objective
Yeah.
can really piss somebody off, and then you start arguing about the words instead of what was behind it. So also knowing like, what do you want to get out of this argument? Like, what is important to you here? Is it changing the behavior? Is it connecting more with the other person? Is it whatever it is? Like, when you get really kind of, now you're arguing about the words, coming back to like, wait a second, what I wanted out of this conversation is to figure out, what do we do about the clothes on the floor? Because, and then you name your concern, because I don't want to be stressed out every time I walk in the house. And from their point of concern, and I know that you don't want to feel controlled. So can we find a meeting point? Like, let's talk about that. Right. Then all of a sudden the conversation is back on track.
Yeah, that's interesting. I because I'm noticing I had a thought there. I don't know what it is now.
I've been doing that all of this interview, so I do
Yeah,
not blame
we're
you.
good. I was just
John, what was Brendan's thought?
what
Can
was
you
it,
read
man?
his brain?
I can, yeah, I'll assume his intentions, and then maybe he and I
Great.
will argue about it.
Don't ask questions though, because I hear that's
No,
objective.
Oh,
no
thank you. That
curiosity.
was it. That was it. I was noticing
Yes.
another. Got it. Another thread. Like as I listen, I hear certain things that are common themes. One that's been huge so far is being curious. And
Mhm.
then as I'm listening to you, and even at the beginning of the interview, one of the things you did a lot was you asked questions. And I
Yes.
noticed that when you're talking about navigating conflict, you said, ask yourself, like, what's the real purpose for this conversation? What do I want to get out of it? What do they want to get out of it? Like, bam, bam, like question, 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 question. I was like, seems like questioning is a thing.
Yeah,
Or
asking
like
the other person,
asking,
asking yourself, consideration is a big thing. Like, take the time to keep your brain on. I don't, yeah, curiosity can be hard when you're under pressure,
yeah,
but if you're out of it, like, it's not like you go home and you never practice punches again, right? And you only do it in the dojo. Like, your punches are going to be way weaker if you're like not training, you're not practicing at any time, like,
yeah,
except, at the dojo once a month or however often you're going. Like, you have to prepare, you have to like keep your body in shape. And that's what I think we can do with conflict if we take some time ahead of time to ask ourselves, like, what do we want? Why am I getting triggered by this? Why do I fucking care? Do I
yeah.
want to be in connection with this person? What
Yeah,
do they
that's another assumption I've hear with people. It's like, well, you can actually just not relate to that somebody. Like, this
Yeah,
is a really
exactly.
shitty situation. I'm like, you ever consider just saying no thanks?
Yeah, and then breaking down the conflict too. Like, it's like, well, I don't want to say no thanks because like that person has my kids. Like, so I've got to stay in the relationship. Well, then you break it down. You're like, all right, are there other options? Like, if we ended relationship, what would happen to the kids? And like, are there ways that I could look at this conflict that allow me to get a little more creative and actually looking at the things that I'm scared of and coming to it with some options open? Because if you don't feel like you have any power in the situation, you're going to spend the whole conflict like underneath just fighting for power and recognition.
Hmm.
Ahead of time, you have to look at like, what stake do you have in this? What power do you have? Not so you can manipulate the other person, but just so you can like feel a sense of your own center. If you don't have your center, you're going to get blown off course by it, by anything. And I think you need to find that even before you go into an argument, or if you find yourself losing it during an argument. That's why we take a break. If you're
Yeah,
not connected to yourself, it's really hard to connect to the other person.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm talking about more energetic things, but a lot of it is because like there are lots of principles for use once you get into an argument, but this is almost like the core and what I imagine folks in Changshen might find a little more interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, who knows who's listening to, to these podcasts? I know. I mean, my audience so far is like 600 people on YouTube, and then the video these podcasts have been getting like 100 people. So out of those 100 people, I don't know who's listening. And
Great.
maybe the fact that the title is going to have stuff about conflict resolution and relationship, and there's going to be different thumbnails. So hey, who knows? Who that
Yeah.
will attract. I was wondering. Well, actually, no, I'm not wondering. But John, do you have anything? I have a question percolating about like challenges, or like what you've discovered about what doesn't work, or what you've discovered about what is detrimental over the years that is not common knowledge, that you only get because you've done lots of work, like some of the wisdom. But John, did you have any questions?
It was similar, actually. I'm curious, Sarah. I know you just talked about principles of effectiveness in regards to relationship and conflict, having conflict better, conflict resolution, or navigating conflict better. But what has been demanded of you? What has been required of you by circumstances, by life, by relationship, to be where you are now, professionally and personally? Because I imagine you're
You
in a
mean kind
totally
of like
different place.
biggest hurdles or something like that? Biggest
Hurdles and
titles?
yeah, I think you were talking about like obstacles and like Brendan, it sounds like you're talking about obstacles and detriments and things that have gotten in the way. And I'm asking, like, what has gotten you to the point? How did you get to where you are now? Like that,
Do you mean
you know
around
what I mean?
my relationship to conflict, or around like specifically authentic relating and business and such?
Probably whichever is most important to you. The
Um,
to the kind of relationships and kind of work that are the most important to you.
got it. I think I'm gonna try the conflict angle just because we've been talking about that. Like I can go the other route, but it's gonna take us on a different tack.
Sure.
I think some of the things that I've had to learn, something I've really had to learn with my husband, we have really different forms of communication. And I had to learn that like not everybody thinks that conflict should go the same way. Like after being in the authentic relating communities and conscious for many years, I find that phrase such a misnomer in a way. Like everyone is conscious to around the same degree. Um anywho, uh pedestal or soapbox off. After being in those for many years, I was like, wow, the way to do conflict is like you should be curious about the other person and you should de-escalate yourself and you should like, find a place of calm and like if you don't reflect the other person's words, you're doing it wrong. My husband does not fight that way. Like I watched him and his ex slash best friend fight a couple times, and it was like they were yelling past each other. Like I had to leave the room because it was such a mom and dad are fighting sort of energy. It was like I don't even know how they were hearing each other. And I really in being with him, like he really showed me some of my own assumptions around how I thought conflict was supposed to go, and I was like pretty intolerant about it going any other way. If he wasn't curious about me, I'd get really upset, and that itself would cause a conflict. And I really had to learn to notice the assumptions I was making and ask myself, like, is this the only way to do it? And why don't I like this? And what stories do I have? And like, where did my dislike of this form of communication come from? And over time, I started like adapting more to his style. And now it's like we can have very quick conflicts where we both get mad at each other and we're really expressive about it and it clears faster. And then one of us will kind of come to a place where we can be more curious or reflect what the other is saying because in a way we've like gotten out that initial burst. So something I've had to learn is that like conflict looks very different depending on the person that you're fighting with. And you can't put a frame of this is the right way to fight on top of it. Like you have to not only negotiate what's inside the conflict, but also the form of the conflict that works best for you. And inside of this, I've started being able to relate to some people that others are like, how do you talk with that person? They're just so difficult. I'm like, well, you just figure out where your meeting point is in terms of styles, which is, the thing with my friend on community. I'm like, cool. Like, no one else in my community wants to talk with her, but I still feel like I can be friends with her because I've just decided when I'm not going to relate with her. Like, so that's been one thing is just trying to get more open-minded around what conflict can look like. Another thing is like understanding the ways in which I can be unreasonable and learning to like call myself out on that. I thought I was very reasonable in conflict for a long time. So it's like I would get upset and I thought I had better relating skills. So I'd get upset at the other person if like it was like, of course they must be like not doing the right reflecting thing or curiosity thing or whatever. And like, oh, I'm, aware of what's going on in myself. And these days it's like I'm trying to look more for the moments where I'm and telling the other person more where I'm like, hey, I just think I'm not being reasonable here. Like I am upset enough that I can't see your point of view. And so I'm just going to stop the conflict here. Or if they tell me that, stopping and being like, am I actually like triggered out of my mind right now? Because if so, like I'm not going to be able to see it and in a way taking their word for it sometimes and going, okay, let's like step away. Because I always prided myself on being a pretty rational person. And I've realized that like that's just not the case a lot of the time when I'm upset. And that's seems silly, but it's like a continuous and kind of hard realization. Like even to let Joff, my husband, like say, hey, you're snapping at me right now. And I'm like, I don't notice that I'm snapping at you. I don't notice anything different, but actually being able to say, am I snapping at him? And even if I don't think I am, is there value in like checking myself a little bit and being a little bit like kind of slowing myself down? So it's almost like learning to take on that even if I don't think someone else's perspective is right, trying to find a grain of truth in it, or if I trust the person believing it for the time being. And that's taken a lot of stepping back from my own stubbornness, which is substantial.
What do you think are some of the like why do you even have that viewpoint? And what I mean by that is what are some of the things that you've had to discover along the way, or are there things that you have discovered or that stand out to you as discoveries that you've made along the way in your learning that have allowed you to have a perspective like you do? Does that
Um,
make sense? Like,
yeah, I
are
mean,
there
I'd say
some?
the main thing is just
Yeah.
like getting smacked around a lot. Like I led community and I led teams for many years. I still do. I lived in community. I had relationships like, and in those places, like you can't avoid being shown
It's the
your
feedback. You
shadows.
get feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like and I opened myself to it. Like I wanted to be a leader that took feedback and there were some situations. Like I remember once a group of my leads I had like started training other people to lead a training and I'd created a little team of folks and they kept telling me that I was like doing stuff that wasn't great in leadership and I kept brushing it off because I was like, guys, like this is situational, this is just your perspective, like this is like, and there were grains of truth in that for sure. And it took them doing a practice that we call fly on the wall. Like they asked if I'd be open to it. Fly on the wall is where one person sits out of the circle within earshot and everyone else talks about them as if they're not there,
Awesome.
which is fucking terrifying. And also, if you have a hard time taking feedback, you can't avoid it because everyone else is talking about their feedback to you and you're not allowed to respond. One of the
Awesome.
worst things that you can do in taking feedback is try to justify yourself because then you don't actually get the feedback and the person feels shut down. So like it forms a place where you can't do that. And I used to like, always justify when I was taking feedback because I thought it was about like making sure the other person understood my point of view instead of understanding theirs, which is not the best feedback practice. Anyways, um, and
Nah.
it showed me, yeah, right. And it showed me, they were especially naming something around my relationship to money. Like I have grown up in a family that's fairly well off, and I early on in authentic relating was like living on basically nothing and just donating most of my time and like running these programs like for pretty much not pay.
Hmm.
And so I had this view of like, well, obviously these leads should be doing that too. It was a little bit of like, well, in my day, I led these trainings for absolutely nothing and I didn't get paid, and like it was a community service. And I was like asking these other people to do the same thing and getting upset if they told me like, hey, we have bills to pay. Like for us, this is a job.
Mm.
And it took them kind of like consensually ganging up on me in that way for me to hear, oh, all of these people have this perspective. There's something I'm not seeing about myself because of where I come from. And so there was a lot of experiences like that where um like other people had enough power and sway over me, or I gave them enough power and sway over me, or their opinions mattered enough that I had to start taking in the feedback.
Yeah, or at least
Um,
taking a good look at
right.
yourself based on that
Yeah.
feedback.
When you have people around you all the time, and you actually have to get something done with them, feedback and kind of iterating to each other is like the only way that you do it. And
Mm.
after a while, you just learn to start giving people caveats of, hey guys, like these are the ways I know I'm interacting or going to interact. That's probably going to piss you off. Are you okay with that? Because it's different personality types. I'm like, hey, I am really bad at tracking physical space. I'm going to leave stuff on the stove or in the sink because I'm just going to turn away and not notice it's there. And what you can do is like text me and be like, hey, Sarah, you left a pot in the sink, and I'll come back and clean it. But if that drives you crazy, like that's something I don't know how to change. Right. So over time, it's like I've I've learned the places in which yeah, I've learned what caveats I need to give people and what is likely going to be able to change and what isn't. And I'm still discovering a lot of that, but I've learned it by having to bump up against a lot of those situations. It's like how you can meditate for years and years and then go out and try to interact with the world and just get completely like blown out, or be an asshole basically. You have to, if you're around a lot of people and a lot of different people continuously and getting feedback and testing yourself, you just kind of get your edges worn down. I think that like trauma like that can be really trauma's like a bad word these days. I'm like, no, trauma combined with disconnection is like PTSD. Trauma combined with you having a place of power within yourself or with other people to process it is growth.
Mm. Cool.
Hmm.
I like it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So then, then it seems like that you had a willingness to. So it seems like a lot of the core of your learning, and correct me if I'm wrong, is coming from your willingness to throw yourself or be in these situations, and you were trying to discover. It looks like you're trying to discover something about these situations. Is that true? Like leading from you, like I
I think
became curious about community and then wanting to create better communities. Is that
I
like
wanted to
some of
make
the core
things
of your?
I wanted to make things happen in the world. And it's really hard to make things happen without other people. So it wasn't often like I want to grow and so I'm going to throw myself into hard situations. It was like
Mm.
I want people to have better connection skills. And it turns out that the way to do that on the highest scale is to create a company that distributes resources and like helps people found community around better connection skills. And now I'm in contact with a lot of people inadvertently and I have to deal with them.
Right. And then now you
And
need to learn the skills to deal with said people. So
right.
up your
And in a
game
way
in lots
I
of
was
people.
lucky enough that I was surrounded by other organizations that were like not doing it super well. Like we're led by people that were kind of getting into petty conflicts with each other and like holding on to their grievances. And I saw the results of that. And so I could be like, that is not what I want to do. And
Mm.
if I want to do the opposite of what they're doing, basically what they're doing is closing themselves off to feedback, holding on to their points of view, and like basically blaming the other person for their experience. I was like, the opposite of that is to be totally open, hear feedback when it comes in and respond to it, make changes when it feels necessary, or tell people why I'm not going to if I'm not going to, engage other people in leadership so they can give perspectives that I don't. And if I end up fighting with someone, try to find any possible way to find a place of equal negotiation instead of holding on to my conflict, but instead like, kind of figuring out, is there places our interests align
Yeah.
that we can support each other instead of fighting each other. And like, I feel really good about having done that for the last 10 years. I feel like, as far as I know, Authentic Revolution is one of the few organizations in the field that like doesn't have a tarnished reputation. Or if we do, people aren't
Nice.
telling us. But haven't seen a lot of haven't seen or heard a lot of bad stuff for people talking about it. Like there's definitely a lot of ways in which we could grow and in which like I think we have shadow, but I can't say that I'm at war with any of my rivals in the field or any of the people that are like technically our competitors. And
Yeah.
that feels
And what is having shadow with
uh
somebody?
things that you don't see about yourself is shadow. Like things that somebody else could be like, hey,
So shadow doesn't necessarily need to be negative.
I don't think so. There's the idea of shadow, and then some people call golden shadow the part that's positive. But like, you could, for instance, say like somebody doesn't see the way in which when they walk into a room, other people like get
Okay,
more
others.
energized or perk up. Or
Interesting.
they don't see the way in which when they walk into a room, other people get like a little bit more depressed, right? But I think we know those people that like their presence kind of seems to make other people a little more energized because
Sure.
they are just like bright, but maybe they don't see that about themselves. It's in their shadow.
Hmm.
I think of the shadow as like the thing that's behind us that like on a regular basis we don't see. And you can
Just
have
don't
golden
see
shadow,
it.
you can have dark shadow.
Yeah, because I
It's
immediately associate shadow with a negative, and I just like in your description,
right,
if I were to translate it into my Ching Shin speak or whatever, it's just I'm not aware of it.
right. Like
Part of
people
me is
often
aware of or
say,
something.
oh, it's your shadow when it's like a negative aspect of the person. It's like, oh, you like cutting off other people when they talk as your shadow. Well, I don't think it's actually shadow unless it's something that you don't see. If you know that you cut other people off and you've done nothing about it and you keep getting the feedback, it's not shadow, it's you being an asshole.
Yeah, it's right out here in front where everybody can see it, including me.
Right.
See?
And you know it, right? If everyone else can see it and you can't, it's in your shadow. And you could know that you cut other people off and you could be like, I've just accepted that. Like that's a thing I do all the time. I'm like, I could be like, I've just accepted that. And if somebody tells me, and I'm going to try to tell other people, like, hey, by the way, I might cut you off. Just like tell me if that bugs you, and I'll try to be more aware of it.
Yeah.
That's something that I try to do. Or I notice their cues. If they draw back and they seem a little bit hurt when I cut them off, I start regulating myself a little better. If they seem not to care, I'm like, cool. I know this is a thing about me. I'm going to keep doing it until this person tells me it bugs them.
Right.
We've all got those things because it's not in my shadow. I've looked at it.
Right. Right. And what before I ask you about shadow, where were you going?
I don't know. That was 30 seconds ago.
Okay.
I'm going stream of consciousness. I haven't thought any of this through.
Yeah, it's fine.
I,
I like the
I have
question.
a curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Can we get back to you representing all women again?
Oh, yeah.
How
Yeah.
does how
Sure.
does this how does this different when the plumbing changes?
When the what?
When the plumbing changes? When yeah, how's this different? How is this different for
Oh, for men
fellas and
and women.
ladies? Yeah.
Um, wow, that's gonna be a generalization.
Because I think a lot of times guys feel more comfortable opening up emotionally after they've had a beer or punched each other in the face or worked on a carburetor or something together.
uh, that's fun. Yeah, there is a question of like, give me a second to think about that. Um, because it is, I've found people that are exceptions to all of these rules, so I'm trying to consider.
Yeah,
Um,
I would say big caveat, like probably mass generalization, but I think
right, I'm
there's
thinking
some.
of individuals who like how this works. One of the big things that I've seen happen is like the like rationality versus I'm gonna like generalize it as the
Yeah,
rationality versus emotions debate, which is something like the man is like something objective happened, let's talk about it, like, or I understand the words of this and therefore it makes sense, or like I'm going to like kind of um Like, it's very important to me that we get the details of this right. And I'm going to like kind of keep quibbling about the details. And the woman is like, it's not about the details of what happened. Like, I don't want to keep going back to like what you like, what exactly, like the like minutiae of it. I want to talk about like what's underneath that, like what you felt. And like for the guy, it's about like, I want to like get clear on the fact that like it was only one day, and like I picked it up, picked up the dishes at 9 o'clock, and there were like three dishes and whatever. It's like the facts are really important. And the woman is like, what I'm upset about is that you disrespected me. But you're like talking in different languages sometimes. Does that make sense?
I think most of the time.
Yeah. And what I have a hypothesis about this,
Hmm.
which I think is and somewhat research backed. Like, women have the ability to recognize more facial expressions than men. They basically pick up on more subtle cues than men
Checks
do.
out.
So women, when they're in groups with each other, like, you'll see them interact differently than men in groups with each other, because women are oftentimes picking up on each other's subtle cues. It's almost like there's a sub language to what we're talking about that men don't speak. And so it's really frustrating because we're feeling like we have to explain all these things to you that for us are communicated through subtle cues.
Yes.
And that can be really frustrating. And so you get this weird language disparity where I think I'm saying things and they're not coming across because I haven't said them with my words. And I'm like, I shouldn't have to say this with my words. I'm saying it with my facial expressions. I'm saying it with my tone of voice. I'm saying it with the way that I just subtly half turned away from you and gave you a slight look. And you should know that means I'm angry, right?
Right.
It's like that sort of thing. And men are frustrated because they're like, but you didn't tell me.
Yes.
Right. And so I don't necessarily have a clear way around it except for saying that like it's good to know that that's going on. For
What?
women, yeah.
What? Because I had an experience a while back where I feel like I made a breakthrough, and I'll tell women sometimes, I'll go like, I know what it's like to be a woman, and then they're like, oh really? Do tell, asshole, or whatever. But and this is where my curiosity comes from. But quick story: I was at an outdoor music festival, and I was with this woman, and I had made out with another woman, and then I went back to see this other woman, and she was pissed. She was pissed at me,
Mhm,
and I was like, I was getting reactive, and then she was reactive, and I was like, all right, Brendan, fuck you, none of your shit. What's her experience? And I like tossed
mhm,
me away and went like crazy to her, like,
mhm,
what's that like? And then something clicked in my brain, and instantly my whole world changed, and I could feel everything. I could feel what she was thinking. I could feel what the people around me were thinking. I could feel everybody moving around. It was like, it was all a feeling, and it was all like smushed together. And I was like, holy fuck, this is a lot.
mhm,
Way too much feeling. Shut it down. No more. But and from that, I'm like, whoa, I feel like I had an insight. It's small. I
mhm.
don't live that female experience, but like what that was like and how different it is. And then I try to tell women, like, yeah, being a man is more like, all that feely stuff, it's all interconnected. We just don't have that,
Yeah,
like that complexity, that
that's a good way of saying it.
nuance, sensitivity. And then so when you were speaking immediately, I'm like, yes, exactly. You're like, there's a whole nother world that women are living that men have no idea about. I'm like, you're, as far as I can tell, that is 100% accurate. We have no fucking clue. And I'm
And I
curious
don't
about
think
what that
that's
world
a
is like.
like, and women are often like, you should just try harder in a way, is like the subtext. And that's not really fair, because
No.
whether it's nature or nurture, it's like not something that you can force another person to be able to see or understand. Um,
Yeah.
and vice versa. So it's like these tools that I'm talking about of looking for interests. One of the reasons to do that is because oftentimes that's where more emotions lie. So sometimes you do, if you're a woman, have to get curious about your partner, like instead of like saying, can't you just feel me? Or like, why do you keep going to this? Like sometimes you actually do have to put that aside, and as painful as it is, go to the verbal curiosity and go, well, like, why does this matter to you? Like,
Yeah.
why do you care if I get the details right? Like, why did you leave stuff on the floor? Like, why, all the, like, kind of more of the understanding questions. Or what you can do is soften a little bit and talk about your personal experience of like, hey, like, this is what happens for me when I walk in and I see clothes on the floor, and like almost force the other person to feel you. You can force empathy by really like telling a story that you are feeling as you say it.
I see that. What
So there are
what are
ways. Mhm.
if I may cut you off and
Yeah,
ask a question, what are some of the things that a man could do
I was just about thinking about that. Yeah.
to bridge the gap? Because I know what I would ask of women. Like, for example, I just had a little tiff with the woman that I'm seeing, and I said, look, you said all these things, but nowhere in there did you tell me what to do.
Right.
You did not say, Brendan, I want you to do XYZ. If I get those like orders, like, yes, ma'am, got it.
Right.
Fucking handle that problem. What? And then, so that would be her stretching to my world. What are some of the things that, generally speaking, men can
Yeah.
do to stretch
No,
into
that's
the
actually
world?
that's actually a good one though. Ask for what you actually need is one. You need the other person to give you direct instructions. Say that.
Yeah, I
Help
did.
them
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
it. Yeah, but that's the thing that you can do even is
You mean, oh,
like
as a man to a woman?
make it easier on the other person. Yeah. So like the same thing keeps happening and you're not giving her any direction on how to make it stop happening. Like tell her, in order to have this change, can you just give me a direct request for what you want so I can try to change that thing, right? Or like here's what would help me help you. Get clear on what that thing is. That's a
And then
huge.
tell that to the female partner. Like,
Tell that
that's
to the other.
something that a man should also be doing, or it would be useful for generally speaking, a man to do.
For sure. Yeah. Like think about how the other person can help resolve the conflict. Like that's a huge one. Um Another one is like to slow down a little bit. Like instead of needing to get the details right, just like fucking take a breath, because a lot of the time that is coming from kind of like your vision has narrowed without you knowing it, and you're in a bit of a place about reactivity, and that's why the small details matter. Take a breath, like try to kind of find yourself again. And then when you try to listen, most of the time, even take some time away. It's not like you don't have access to your emotions. It's just that like when you get narrowed in, they don't matter as much. Like the thing that matters is solving the problem and figuring out what happened.
Yeah.
So you have to like have a little bit of space inside yourself to even figure out like what is going on here.
And generally speaking, what are some of the a female's needs or desires around conflict? Like, if a male is hyper focused on solving the problem and some minutia fucking details, what is a woman, generally speaking? Again, I just want to make that clear.
Yeah.
What are they craving in that moment
So I
from
want
their
to name something
partner?
which is like, from this perspective, it's like the man wants to solve it and the woman wants to feel it. That's not
Yeah.
actually true. Like the woman also wants to solve it and the man also wants to be understood. They just want it kind of at different times. It's
Hmm.
almost like men want to solve it and then it's almost like they want to solve it and then they want to be understood. Like, and then women want to like be understood and then solve it. And you're like on different like fucking frequencies. It's not like the woman doesn't want to fix the thing. Like she wants to figure
Right.
out how you
Right.
can like pick up your clothes so the thing doesn't keep happening. But women oftentimes get very triggered by feeling like they're both sides get really triggered by feeling like they're not understood. That's the core thing underneath. Like
How do we
understand me.
how do we understand women when my one of my one of my biggest
One of the best things you can do is ask a question like can you tell me what you're upset about,
mm,
and then reflect at least once it sounds like, and just try like throw something out there. You can be totally wrong, but like try to, like it sounds like that hurt you. Like it can be as simple as that. It sounds like you don't like it when I leave my stuff on the floor. She'll be like, yeah, I fucking don't like it. And like it's like you're like kind of showing willing. And this is important for women too. Like one side has to extend first.
What do you mean willing, and what do you mean? I think I know what you
Like
mean
show,
by saying willing to get their experience,
willing,
willing
yeah,
to
willing to
feel
take a
better.
step back from your own is the main thing. Like willing to like leave a little bit of space.
Okay.
Um, the other thing that you can do, and this helps for me at least, I don't know if it like will help for all women, but like oftentimes I don't see what the other person has been doing to try to help. And sometimes men are a little bit more like actions focused than women. So you may have done a lot of things that you think are really caring and they're just not being seen because they're not happening verbally, they're not happening in this moment, whatever. And so like something that helps me sometimes is like for the other person just to tell me, here's the ways that I have been trying to meet that need or
Mm,
care for you. It's just a good reminder. Like I've been doing these actions, I just haven't been talking about them.
right. And maybe not in a, and maybe the way that those are delivered, those communications are delivered as well, probably, I'm sure, well, okay, obviously it would make a difference, but it's like, you haven't seen what I've been doing for you.
No, not so
Clearly,
much
I've been
that.
doing
Yeah,
blah, 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 blah,
exactly.
blah. It's like, no,
Yeah.
here's what I have been doing.
Yeah, like not delivered in the tone of like, I've taken out the trash. I've gone and got the kids. I've like it's whatever. It's like, like, hey, I just want to like, by the way, I've been trying really hard for the last week to pick up my clothes. And I don't know if you noticed it, that this is the first time this week that I've actually left them on the floor. And then you can make a request of like, would you like, can you acknowledge that? Or like, do you notice that? Or like, does that make a difference? And then it's kind of like you've softened the argument a little bit. And again, that's something that both sides can do. But if underneath what's happening is that you're really feeling missed, you can try to get the other person to see what it is that you have done in a way that doesn't sound defensive, especially if you've tried to fix that particular problem.
Right. Right.
The one last thing I'd say is like a common pattern that can happen between women and men is that like women get like worked up and emotional, and men feel like the only thing that they can do in response is retreat because you don't want to like get big and aggressive towards a woman. Like it's just not
Mm-mm.
a good idea, right? It's like not a thing we do.
Mm-mm.
Um,
Don't do
and
that.
so it's like, okay, well now I have to go small or I have to stonewall. I just have to stop talking. I have to turn away, whatever it is. Um, then the woman starts spinning out more because she feels like you've just retreated and she actually wants contact, but like not aggression. And it's hard, I think, for a lot
What
of
is
men to learn.
what is
That's what I was gonna
contact?
say.
Oh
So
yeah.
like she wants to feel that you're there with her. And what you can do is like you can lean in, you can like make your voice steady. You can be like, hey, I'm with you on this. I'm here. Right? So like you're showing instead of like going away and kind of being like, yeah, I mean, like, I know I did that thing. I didn't really mean to, just being like, hey, I'm here with you. I want to understand. Can you help me understand?
Mm.
Right? Like you hear the tone of my voice, you see my body language. That feels like being met. And if you do that, you'll oftentimes notice that the other person, the woman does de-escalate.
Hmm.
It's just
Yeah,
she's
that's
felt very, very
counterintuitive.
alone.
That's definitely counterintuitive because they're like from
Right.
my male brain, woman out of control. Either I'm gonna fucking annihilate you and it's not gonna be pretty, or
Right.
I want to annihilate you, but I better fucking not. So I'm just gonna shut
Exactly.
down and I'm not gonna kill you now.
I, I call this the puffer fish and the hermit crab. Like either you like blow up with all the spikes,
Yeah,
you're like,
there's
I'm gonna
two
come back at
options. We only got two.
the yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
interesting. Yeah, this interesting third option. So, what is it about that that is de-escalating for the woman? Like, what is being met as what is the experience of being
Okay,
met feel
so
like?
like
Can you
let me
describe
give
it?
an example.
Yeah.
Imagine that you're in martial arts and you're like, cool, like I am ready to fight, like, I've kind of prepared for this. And you go and you start boxing with the other person, and the other person only blocks. They
Mm.
never throw a punch back. Like they're dancing around the ring, they're blocking, they're like, and you're like, I came here to like, I want
Like, give
contact.
me something. Give me
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Like, and you start feeling disrespected. You start feeling like underneath kind of lonely. You start feeling like, why am I even doing this?
Interesting.
Hmm.
Okay.
That's what it feels like on the other side when the guy is like kind of being defensive and
When
going
he's
away.
retreating.
Yeah, you're like, I don't necessarily want you to punch me in the face, but I do want to feel contact. Like I want to feel that you're here.
That you're engaging with me or some like it's like
Yeah,
work with me. Don't just
exactly.
fucking
Like,
run away.
and what happens usually is that when a woman starts feeling like the other person is backing away, she
Mhm.
starts throwing punches harder and faster because she's like, maybe I'll get contact this way.
Interesting.
And what's underneath it is like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to feel met. Like I want to feel your masculinity. Like why in so many other places in life you're willing to be dominant, you're willing to like help us like, get the car fixed. And then when it's in an argument, you're just like going away. Like it almost feels like the other person is being weak in some way. And
And
you don't respect.
that makes it worse.
Yeah. And so there's a way of meeting that's not being a pufferfish. It's just like leaning in and being like, hey, I'm here. And like even talking about your experience, because most of the time we either in that space shout our experience or hide it, instead being like, hey, can
Right.
you
Only have
listen
two
to what
options.
happened to me here and share it? And usually like may seem weird, but a lot of the time that'll de-escalate because it's not so much in that moment about what you say, it's about the fact that you're willing to meet the energy.
Huh.
I'm imagining that sounds abstract for you, Brendan. You're willing to meet the energy.
No, I
You get it?
yeah, it's just like a different way of thinking or a different way of considering the matter. Like I get a sense of something because it's like I only have just turning on my typical male brain is only two options, either kill or not.
Hmm.
And then if I don't in my brain, if the woman is getting more aggressive and I'm like, lady, you don't realize that right now I am holding back a wall of destruction
Hmm.
and you need to calm down because if you keep going it's gonna or whatever. And then like this third option, but I think my scrunchy face and like is like, oh yeah, there's a third possibility of, seems like presence, it seems like being there, it seems like also speaking
Hmm.
more like, here's what my experience is. We're like,
Yes.
as a man, we're like, talking bad, talking
Yeah.
dangerous, don't talk. That will show that you're weak. And then it, or whatever we have about that, just generally speaking. And so I'm just like carving out a space for this third option, which is more steady. It's definitely counterintuitive from my typical male brain. And I was like, I didn't know that was an option.
So I would give you and any of the guys watching, if you want, like a homework assignment to try.
Perfect.
Get one of your women friends,
What?
have them. Yeah.
One woman friend. Okay,
Got
maybe
them
you need
off
to go
screen.
out and get some women friends first.
Doesn't have to be your partner. Actually, better that it's not.
Yeah, maybe.
Um,
Okay, you hear
find
it? Yep.
find someone like, moderately neutral. Ask them to basically role play getting angry at you.
Good call.
And then see if there is a way you can meet the energy. Like try on different ways of doing it. So like just taking that phrase, how do you meet the energy? Like try that on and try different things because it is going to look different for each person.
Sure.
And then, pause the scenario at some point, like maybe even have a timer for how long you're going to be in it, or you or the woman can pause it and then debrief. What worked, what didn't. Do it again. Debrief, do it again, and do it until you like can
And
consistently.
debriefing is just real quick. I'm assuming it's you talk about what happened after the
Yeah,
fact and get feedback, like what worked, what
thank
didn't,
you.
how did
The
it
best way
go?
to do it in this case would be to ask the woman, like, were there, like, what did I do that worked and what didn't? Basically, like,
And what
what
did you
had you,
feel when I did
what
those
did you
things? Maybe.
feel? Yeah, like what moment did you feel like you got even more mad, and moments do you feel like where you like kind of like started to feel something different, or we were a little more on the same page, or whatever it is. And remember that like it's not about getting the words right. It's more about like what you're doing physically and energetically.
Right. That's the kicker, I think, for men. I think that's the bridge. That's like a what? No. We what? No. No, we don't operate like that.
But
So
We
there's like a,
do.
you're just not aware of it.
oh
We do
yeah,
operate like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't. I'm right.
Yeah, exactly.
You're doing it right now, buddy.
I know. It's true. It's true. It's interesting. It's
And
fascinating.
women
I just
feel
don't
it.
think that way.
Women
Yes.
feel it. And that's the
Yeah.
difficult thing is like all the time you're giving out signals that an alien race is reading.
Yeah.
And you don't know that they're reading it.
Yeah. This is 100% agreement. And some of us know that we're being read to some degree.
Yeah.
I bet most men have no fucking idea, which is why I'm glad you're here to help articulate these things that are hard to talk about, I think, or hard to articulate.
I'm trying. It's fun. I haven't gotten to talk about this maybe like ever in this way before. So it's actually really fun to articulate for myself.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. I'm also a little aware of time. I know we
Yeah.
scheduled an hour. Do you need to go?
Yeah, I think it's been almost 2 hours. So I do have a call in 15 minutes. So I do
Okay.
need to go.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. Sara, thank you very much for coming on to my podcast. I appreciate it. And thanks for your time. Can you please tell people? So, you guys heard there's a homework assignment. Go out and then send some comments down. Let us know how it goes and tell Sara how it went so she can get some feedback too, if you want. And how can people find you? Is there anything that you're offering to people? Any news of upcoming events that you have going on, or anything in your world that you want to share with my, as of right now, limited audience that would be of value to you?
For sure. A lot of the stuff that I talked about today is related to our Art of Difficult Conversations class. So it's December. We just started a cohort of that. We'll be doing one again in probably, I think, March and April will be the next ones, or April and May is when those will start.
Awesome.
We may have an online version out before then. We also run facilitation trainings. So if you want to if you want to lead from a place of more like presence and responsiveness to what's happening in the room and taking feedback and all that, we do like a 4 month long, really intensive, valuable online facilitation training.
Great.
We have one starting in February and March, I think.
Okay.
Um,
Can you send me links to those? Do you have links to
yeah,
that?
and they're just from the website too. But yeah, I'll send you links. And then I'm working on, we didn't get to talk about community building, but I'm working on a course for that that will launch probably late next year.
Awesome.
For how do you build in-person community that is successful and resilient to conflict and where people aren't dicks to each other and stuff like that. As much as possible.
Love it.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks. I'll post a link to all that in the description.
And the
Yeah,
last thing is the authentic relating games we talked about at the start. There's a manual for those. There's over like 250 of them now sourced from all those communities across the world, and that's available on the website to just download, and you can play those with friends or pick out ones you want to do with colleagues or partners or whatever.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Awesome. Sounds great. I'll put links to all that down in the description. Sara, again, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. It's great to see you.
It was a lot of
John,
fun.
thank you too.
Thank you, Brendan and John.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye.